Manchester United 1, Newcastle 0. A vital 3 points at home at Old Trafford for Manchester United to make that Christmas period just a little bit cheerier. Ruben Amorim's depleted squad found a way to win, were tough to beat and secured 3 big points. So this game started off with a bit of a surprise. We saw the team news was released. I was out at the time and didn't actually watch the game live, but I saw the team news come through on my phone and the first thing I went was, oh god, it's going to be a back three again. Unless Patrick Dorgu weirdly is going to be playing on the wing. And funny enough, it was that. Manchester United were in a 4-2-3-1 shape with Patrick Dorgu playing on the right wing for Manchester United. And, you know, it was that back four. This wasn't a wing back who sometimes was here and then sometimes was here. Both on and off the ball, Dorgu was a right midfielder. This was United playing in a back four throughout the 90-minute match for the first time. We've seen moments before where we shift to a 4, but never a complete 90. This is the first time that we have seen that. And early on, it caught Newcastle a little bit off guard, and Manchester United started the game very fast, and Newcastle didn't know how to deal with United. And the reason for that was because of the way that Newcastle were pressing was causing problems for themselves. You see, what Newcastle were trying to do was squeeze Tonali a little bit further forward into a front two alongside Voltemade, and we're trying to match up with United, sort of like we can see here, Tonali jumping further forward. The big problem that Newcastle had, though, was that Mason Mount had all the time in the world behind that Newcastle midfield. So that's why United were able to start the game so fast, because we caught Newcastle off guard. Then Aaron Ramsdale gets a very convenient injury, and Newcastle completely changed the way that they were pressing, and that's why the tone sort of changed after that first 10 minutes. So let's just take a quick look at the way that they change. Tonali goes from pressing as one of the most advanced players to suddenly now playing as one of the deepest, almost man-marking Mason Mount. Voltemade moves across over here, Anthony Gordon comes in from the left towards Heaven, and Lewis Hall is now given this dual role, where one moment he's on Patrick Dorgu, and the next moment he is on Diogo Dalot. The reason why Eddie Howe made this change was to try and stop United outnumbering them in midfield. So that's why we saw that weird first 10 to 15 minutes where the flow was proper up and down as both teams were making changes. So after this, the game sort of settled a little bit, and we are initially going to focus on United now trying to get on the ball and take a look at how we look in this new structure in possession. And what I would say here immediately is that the structure wasn't the most important thing. I think it was the freedom and the instructions that the players were given. Normally what we see from United is a back three in possession and a very rigid structure. You know, the positions are clear for the players. The wing-backs hold their width and they go up and down the touchline like so. The forward stays in the middle. The two inside 10s stay in their little zone. But what we saw in this game was the United players given more freedom to go and find the space. So if a player like Ugarte saw some space, he was given the freedom to go into it. For example, we saw at times Ugarte would move to the left-hand side, almost like a left-back, so that Shaw could move further forward and Cunha could come in. Casemiro would go and play as a pivot, and Dalot would move to the right. United are now in a 2-3 shape. In the next moment, though, Dalot could drop deeper, Ugarte could go further forward into the space, and United are now in a 3-1. It could change again. Ugarte would drop deeper, Dalot wider, Shaw deeper, and now United are in a 2-4 shape, and then we also saw United playing in the 3-2 shape as well. Lots of different shapes for United on the ball. And I think what United were trying to do was pull the Newcastle midfielders out of position as much as possible. You see, when you're really predictable with your rigid structure, like we normally are, it's very easy for the opposition to pick up which player they're marking. They've just got to stick with them. But when you've got someone like Ugarte who's playing here and then over here and then over here, we can see it in his heat map all over the pitch, that's much more difficult for Newcastle to pick up. And I think the main plan for United was to try and expose the flatness of the Newcastle midfield. I felt like what we were trying to do was draw one of Ramsey, Tonali or Guimaraes out of position to then try and access that space in behind them. I'd just like to quickly interrupt the video to ask you guys if you could please subscribe to the channel. I'd love 85,000 subscribers before the end of the year. We are so close now, so if you could subscribe, that'd be a massive help. So if that's the obvious area that United are going to try and exploit, what United need to try and do is find a way of getting there. That's where the weakness is for Newcastle. Manchester United have just got to find a way of getting the ball into that position. And I think initially the personnel help Manchester United massively help us, because when you've got Lisandro Martinez and Aiden Heaven on the pitch, two incredibly gifted ball players, that gives you a lot of ability to work the ball forward, but it also gives you the ability to draw Newcastle out at times. Someone like Heaven is capable of drawing pressure, beating his man, and of course that opens up the opposition structure. What we also saw though was the personnel of the two wingers. Cunha That makes sense. But Patrick Dorgu on the right side playing as a winger. But this actually made a lot of sense for Dorgu. You see, Dorgu, what we have to focus on is his habits as a player. What Dorgu has always looked to do since coming to United is try and take his first touch inside the pitch. That's something that he has always done in the United shirt. And on the left, it's worked at times, you know, he takes his first touch and he comes inside, but that's always brought the ball onto his weaker right foot, which has often seen him getting a little bit stuck with what he's trying to do next. Whereas playing on the right, still sort of naturally wanting to roll inside the pitch, he's now coming onto his stronger foot. And I thought some of the combination play between Dorgu, Mount and Cunha was really promising. It never quite clicked, which is understandable. You know, these three have never played as a trio behind a striker before. But you could see what United were trying to do. We were trying to roll into those positions behind the Newcastle midfield. And in terms of trying to build on this in the future, I think there's a lot of potential there. You know, the rotational idea in the first phase with these players all moving into different positions. And then if you can imagine this was perhaps Bruno Fernandes in here with Mbumo or Ahmad, you can imagine that would become even more deadly. But I do think Dorgu deserves a lot of praise. Of course, the goal he scored was absolutely fantastic. And in general, I think he had a very good game, sort of trying to come inside, trying to combine, trying to take his man on. I think he played very well. What I will say, though, is apart from that, United were actually quite toothless in this game. Right, so now it is time to look at United from a defensive point of view. On the ball, I think United played alright in the first half. Like I said, we didn't really sustain attacks. It wasn't that sort of game. This was always a game where Newcastle were capable of throwing punches back themselves, which you expect. You know, you look at the two starting 11s, United are lacking some top-end quality. We're missing some very good footballers, right? And that's always going to damage the squad. Off the ball, I think we saw a similar approach to what we've seen in recent weeks. United trying to go over high press at times and trying to do so by using a diamond. So what that involves is, of course, our centre forward playing as a centre forward, and then one of the wider players coming inside also. So on this occasion, it was Cunha coming inside from the left and forming a front two. Now for Mount, that means that he is now going to play as a 10, and Casemiro is sort of going to anchor in midfield with Dorgu and Ugarte either side. And what I wanted to say here is I think this suits Ugarte much more. In this game, I think he played pretty well, to be honest, and it suited him being the hunter in midfield rather than the protector. And what I mean by that is when he plays in this position and is sort of responsible for screening and protecting and almost being the last line of defence before the back four, he's too aggressive and he leaves too many spaces. But when he's got Casemiro sort of anchoring behind him, Ugarte can go and hunt a little bit further up the pitch, and he does a pretty good job of doing that. However, United did have a problem. I like the idea of this diamond. I think it's a good shape. I think it eventually allows you to jump man to man. But United didn't actually do it very well in this game. So I think the idea is nice, but it clearly needs some coaching, and the execution wasn't right of how United were trying to do this, and it made us very ineffective in the press. You see, what Newcastle would do was have Tonali and Guimaraes, for example, either side of Mason Mount and push Jacob Ramsey a little bit further forward. Now, initially, that is absolutely fine. Mount is fine picking up two players in this position, but eventually, he's going to need some help from Ugarte. And Ugarte can only help if the rest of the backline also help. If one player doesn't, it falls apart, and we saw that. Mason Mount in this situation here has got two players and they just separate from Newcastle. They make the gap absolutely massive, and Mount cannot physically cover both of them, so Newcastle very comfortably moved the ball up from the back. That was a problem. I think beyond that, as Newcastle came a little bit further forward, the problem that United had was probably just a lack of aggression and intensity, which to an extent I do understand. You know, this is a very wounded Manchester United team. Confidence isn't high. We're not winning many football matches. We haven't won at home in 2 months. We're missing all of our best players, really, and even in the starting 11 we've got some good players, but they're players returning from fitness issues. You know, like Sesko and Martinez have both had spells on the sideline. So I understand United not necessarily playing with an insane aggressiveness and an insane confidence. I think the most important thing here wasn't necessarily performance, it was about getting a result. So I don't think United were trying to be super aggressive here, but it did cause a bit of a problem because Sesko and Mount just couldn't lock the side, you know, lock Newcastle to one side of the pitch. What we like to try and do where possible is sort of control where the opposition are going. I think that's what you want to do defensively. That's always the aim, to try and dictate where the ball is going to end up. United struggled with that. We struggled to lock Newcastle to one side, and that ball could sort of be bounced about the back. Guimaraes and Tonali both dropping in, and then Fabian Schär happy to step from the back, sort of created this problem for United where the players looked like they were trying to press, but we were never quite doing it collectively, and that was a slight problem. Okay, so let's now move things a little bit further forward for Newcastle. I'm trying to do a very balanced view of this game because I think it was quite a balanced football match. I don't think either side was obviously better than the other, and I think this is where Newcastle started to carry a bit of a threat. I think their wide combinations were quite good. Now, centrally, I thought Newcastle had a few more problems, and that's because United weren't in a 4-4-2 off the ball like we've seen in the past. I personally felt that it was a bit more of like a 4-4-1-1. I felt that Mount was more of a midfielder rather than a forward. Like here, you can see Mount is connected with the midfield, which allowed United to match up with Newcastle, which I think is a really good thing to do defensively. It sort of gave us that number in there, which we don't normally have. We often find ourselves 2 versus 3 in there. So having Mount playing as a bit more of a midfielder, I think really gave us an extra solution defensively, which was nice to see. The problem was more out wide, and I think the problem we've got here is the energy of the Newcastle midfield is off the charts, to be honest. There's almost no one else like it in the Premier League in terms of the yards that Newcastle can cover, the areas that they will go into. And United had a problem where the likes of Ramsey and Tonali, sometimes Guimaraes as well, would run into these channels of space between the midfielder and the fullback. United had a problem with that because the United fullback is sort of responsible for the winger. The centre-backs are following Voltemade, which they did a brilliant job of doing, by the way. They were absolutely fantastic. But it does mean that the midfielders have got to go with these runs. And this almost makes United more passive, right? Because as Tonali makes that run, Ugarte feels the need to drop deeper. And that does open up that room in front where Voltemade could link. Now again, Lisandro Martinez and Heaven did a very good job of sort of clamping him down. But there was a potential problem there. More so when the play was focused near Casemiro. Now Casemiro is a fantastic player. He's had a very good season so far, I think. But do you want to see Casemiro regularly covering a lot of ground, sprinting into these channels to defend? I don't think you do, and that's probably why we saw the changes that we saw with Casemiro hooked fairly early. Now, just on the changes, the team that United ended up with was almost laughable. Just look through these positions. Look how young that back four is. The oldest player is 26-year-old Tyrell Malacia, who's barely played football in the last 2 years. We've got Fletcher in midfield with Ugarte. We've got Dalot and Dorgu as our wingers. You know, the Manchester United team in the end was so unbalanced, and that's why in the second half, United didn't get close. I think the second half was really bad for Manchester United in terms of taking the game to Newcastle. I think we failed to do that completely. Cunha was sort of our out ball, but beyond him, we didn't really have anything. It was a bad second half from Manchester United. There's no dressing that up. Newcastle were very dominant. But what I will say is I think the work rate of the Manchester United players, the desire, the heart from them was absolutely fantastic. And that's why I'll always say, I don't think this current squad can ever be accused of downing tools for the manager or not working hard enough. I think the intensity that they show, the work rate that they put in, the yards they're willing to cover in unfamiliar positions, you know, is absolutely fantastic. And for me, I think it was that which ultimately got United the result. Defensively, we were almost in a back six towards the end with Dalot and Dorgu dropping in as fullbacks. And you know, at this point, it almost goes beyond tactics a little bit. It's a case of Manchester United just hanging on for dear life. But I think the players did that very, very well. It wasn't pretty, but I guess it was effective. That is probably my summary of the game, actually. It wasn't pretty, but it was just about effective. And, you know, normally I'm of the view of we have to look at the bigger picture. We have to look at the performance. You know, we have to figure out what we can take from this game. The longevity of it. Is this something that we can build on? Is this going to work next week? Is this something that, you know, can eventually win us a Premier League title? Normally that's my focus, on the performance more so than the result. But I think every now and then you get a game like this, which is a little bit different. I think this is one of those games where we're missing 6, 7, possibly even 8 first choice players, particularly with Mason Mount going off at half time as well. We're missing so many players. I think it's one of those games where you have to find a way. You have to be hard to beat, and United were. I didn't really feel that Newcastle ever looked like scoring a goal, so fair play to the United defence. And then you've just got to find a way to grab a goal, and Dorgu did with amazing quality. I can't sit here and say it was a fantastic Manchester United performance, but it got the result, and that's what we needed today. You know, in the future, I will ask for more. I will ask for a more aggressive team off the ball, a team that presses better, a team that plays out from the goalkeeper a little bit more. But this is one of those games where I think you take what you can, and for United, that was all 3 points, and it's an absolutely fantastic result. We've now got 3 favourable fixtures, so a chance for United to build in this new structure, which did show some ideas and some signs of fluidity, which I'm looking forward to seeing more of as we move forward. Right now, I think that's sort of where we wrap the video up, because it was a weird game. United weren't amazing, but it's a fantastic 3 points, so I'm a very, very happy man. So we're going to wrap the video up there. Thank you guys very much for watching this one. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have, please leave a like, subscribe, and get your notifications on. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.